Good morning there. School of Tomorrow, futurists, teachers. What this is going to be is a slideshow that I've done before. I'm going to be talking to teachers of this material. So when I get to a slide, it's going to be things like, well, when you get to the slide, what you're going to want to do, or might want to do, or could do, and so on. In other words, I'm going to narrate this slideshow as if I'm giving advice. This is not a slideshow, this is my desktop. As if I'm giving advice to a current student of mine who is later going to be a teacher of the same material, and we're going over one of the teaching aids, you might say. Sorry about all this flashing around. This is normal technical difficulties. I see I have, oh my goodness, I see I'm being fought. There's malware in this picture. Oh dear, malware. I think I'll hit the start over and record this again if I can't get this to work. But let's just see, view. Okay, we're back. I'll leave that early fight with the browser, why not? So at the bottom right here, this URL to get to these slides, you might even follow along. So you can sit there at your laptop and pop up these slides and go through them with me. And this is a Google shortened, like Google doesn't let you do this anymore. It no longer offers the service that you can shorten a URL through them to get just exactly this pattern, goo.gl, but the old ones are still honored. So already it's gotten to be esoteric and kind of like out there. There'll be a link in the YouTube description and so on. But this, I didn't plan to get this esoteric, but esoteric's a theme here. Because Synergetics itself, what we're going to be talking about, is still, in this day and age, November 16th, 2020, a bit on the esoteric side. And so here in this, okay, so let's get this climatron, exactly. St. Louis Botanical Garden, picture I took. Michael and Heather took me around. These are old friends. I've been to St. Louis a few times. My young daughter was in college then, and I would take the rental car from St. Louis across the state of Illinois to Richmond, Indiana, and then back to St. Louis. I did that loop a couple times. It was a pretty good adventure. I have friends in Champaign-Urbana as well. I worked for a company that had started in that area not that long ago, teaching the Python computer language. So I'm giving you some bio about me and fighting with my slides again, and recommending that you do the same. See, you're the teacher, and you could say, oh, Kirby took this picture in St. Louis, blah, blah, but then here's a chance for a little bit of your bio or auto bio. And then also, what I'm going to do is mention a few things that other YouTubes that I've done in the same channel touch on that relate to whatever picture on occasion. But again, that's suggesting you elaborate into content of your own. Maybe you've built a dome. Maybe, we'll see, right? First of all, you want overview, of course, about what the whole show's about before you decide exactly how much time to spend on this, that, or the other. Another piece of bio for me is I worked with the Fuller Institute through Kiyoshi Kuramiya as a first webmaster. We grabbed bfi.org and got that domain name secure. Kiyoshi did that. And then I built a very first fairly primitive hand-coded HTML tables, just a banner page, you could say. I think it had 4 or 5 total pages. Very primitive early web stuff, right? HTML was brand new. No one had seen this markup before. We're all running out and buying books on XML after that. Not that that ever really went anywhere the way you thought it was. But, it's been a bumpy ride, an interesting ride in the computer world, and I've been in it. Coded applications and so forth. So this is a typical shelf of what I've had for a while anyway. I want to draw attention to Private Sky, these 2 volumes. First of all, Private Sky is important. It's used kind of in a solipsistic sense, like Wittgenstein might use it. Like Wittgenstein, you can imagine talking about his private sky, right? Because he talks about the visual field and so on, kind of phenomenologist and so on. What I want to mention is that the synergetics, which is what we're kind of moving through, synergetics and synergetics 2, aims at being kind of a logic. It's a way of thinking. It's one person's way of thinking, but laid out in such a way that you might find it useful and absorb some of it. So, like Heidegger in some ways. Why do I say Heidegger? Because very typical of some philosophers, what they do is repurpose or use familiar words, ordinary words, in extraordinary ways. They use ordinary words in extraordinary ways, such as frequency, for example. That's going to be overloaded in synergetics. And it's good to read a bunch of humanities getting into this, including, I would recommend, Love's Body by Norman O. Brown, because synergetics is highly metaphorical. It uses it glues things together by association a lot. It's kind of a work, I would say it's a poetic work. And you would say, ha ha, what are Fuller's credentials as a poet? And it's like, interesting question, really. I want to mention something in this channel, which is I trace Ezra Pound. He's a very important figure of the 1900s. He came out on the wrong side, you could say, of the war, was imprisoned. He was caged by the U.S. Army and shipped back to the United States for trial. He's kind of, think of him as Snowden or Assange, one of these kind of people. But he's a poet, and his friends, he's got a massive amount of poet friends because he helped a lot of people with their careers. Not just because of that, but like James Joyce and so on. It's like you can't shoot this guy or hang him or whatever. We're talking about one of the great poets of the 1900s. Like, and that's kind of how we can, most of us, I think, hear it now. It's like Ezra Pound, oh yeah, he's one of those poets that are boring, and we don't really read poetry anymore. But whatever, he's a poet, okay? I think he got through with that, and that's largely thanks to Hugh Kenner. So who I'm talking about and what I'm talking about, this history and these people, this is Fuller's circle. He knows Hugh Kenner well. Hugh Kenner writes his bio. He meets Ezra Pound, Spoleto, and like James Jesus, Angleton, right? Angle? That CIA guy, you know, he goes and visits Ezra Pound as a youth and is really into this journal that he creates called, I think it's called Orlando, right? You probably know this stuff. So when Ezra gets shipped back to the States and they're going to shoot him, he ends up getting pretty nice digs in a mental hospital. Like he can have people come see him. He's just under house arrest, basically, what we would call house arrest. And that placates the American people, right? They allow him to live. As a crazy person, okay, you can do that. But, you know, you were on the radio as a traitor, Ezra Pound. So you're going to live your life in this mental hospital. Eventually, they let him go back to Italy. And it's later there that Fuller meets him. Well, if they met earlier, too, I wouldn't know that. You know, I don't know everything. Good question, then. When did Fuller first meet Ezra Pound ever in the entire history? Do we even know? Right? I don't know if we know. So, put him in that poet place, and some of this is like, so if it's about credentials and what are Fuller's credentials as a poet, it's more like what are the credentials of a physicist to be reading Synergetics, right? I can turn it around, like, what are you doing? You don't know shit. But that's not the right attitude. I don't think you should do that. I think you should acknowledge that Fuller wanted to have a relationship with like Newton and Gibbs. Gosh. So there's a lot of math in synergetics and a lot of physics in terms of, you know, he wants to embed what humans know. It's not really a popularization though, because he's inventing his own language to do this stuff, right? That's the thing. As a poet, you create what we might call an ethnosphere. CJ got me thinking in those terms. So we're creating an ethnicity here, the synergetics ethnicity. You've heard maybe of the disciples and so on. And like I would be one of those disciples. I had a philosophy background at Princeton. I really was into Wittgenstein, still am. And so, okay, these slides, it seems like I'm going through quickly, and this is the meat and potatoes of it in a lot of ways. And I just wanted to sort of give you the full picture of those, and we'll go back. But he's kind of a dimension theorist in this section, like a Karl Menger, where he's saying, how can you separate the dimensions? You do this whole thing with this story called Flatland, which is not a book of math. It's in the humanities. It's political satire. And you'd be amazed how mathematicians rely on this book Flatland, which is not a math book, and put so much of their eggs in that basket. But of course, we know mathematically, as scribbles on paper, you can have n-dimensional Euclidean geometry with polytopes and all that. And Synergetics actually is dedicated to Coxeter, the University of Toronto-based polytope genius, right? They were friends by the end of it. Early on, maybe they didn't get along so well because of the Cold War and stuff. How Canadians feel about Americans sometimes, right? It's not that great. And Fuller seemed to Coxeter at first to be one of these ego-fat Americans sitting in the Pentagon who thinks they run the world, right? Another one of those. A really despicable type, I understand. Okay, but Fuller wasn't that. He wasn't that. So you get the part about 4D, right? We're just going to account for volume. This is the part where you might want to do some more backup reading. Like, you're going to explain it or not to your audience, and I would rather, now having spent a lot of time on the initial slides, just refer you to an earlier version of the slideshow where I talk more about the geometry, the terminology, the mites, the sites, the A's, the B's, the T's, the E's. You get the flavor, right? S module. Now, Koski and I kind of didn't see where that was going to be all that interesting. It looked kind of like a dangling, like, what is this S module? Sure, it's in the same neighborhood in terms of volume and so on. Tetravolume we always use. So when I say volume, it's volume. We all know volume. It doesn't matter what. If you're using cubes or tetrahedrons to measure volume, why should that matter? Ultimately, it shouldn't matter. It should be trivial, right? So let's use tetrahedrons. That's what Fuller's doing, and hardly anyone else made that choice. So already his work's kind of interesting and out there. Anyway, it turns out that the cube octahedron and icosahedron of the same edge length have a certain ratio. The volume of the cube octahedron is greater than that of the corresponding icosahedron, and my gosh, here is where you would have to do the jitterbug, teachers. So hold on, I'll let you just hold on. Oh gosh, so yeah, you gotta have this and do this. Don't do the whole thing if you don't want to. Just go cube octahedron, icosahedron, cube octahedron, icosahedron. This icosahedron, by the way, is not the one in this picture. And you could say, well, what are you talking about? Icosahedron one's as good as another if it's regular or not. But there's a whole progression here. It's after you shrink it down to this octahedron that you can now inscribe another icosa into this octahedron, and that's the one in the picture. And the volume of that octahedron is going to be 4, and this icosahedron is therefore less than 4, right? And it's the difference in volume between the two that we're making up by bricking in on the faces of the icosahedron, these S modules. We get the octahedron of volume 4, and it turns out that the ratio of the VE to the icosa is equal to that of the S to the E module. Okay, and there's irrational numbers here. This is not all whole number stuff, and the fact that these are the same ratios is not hyped talked about linked that much in Synergetics or Synergetics 2. In other words, 40 years have gone by. And a few people, very few, with sort of AA battery persistence have kind of drilled away, continuing forward in this vein without a whole lot of assistance from anywhere. And hey, it's gotten even cooler, right? We can now express volumes in terms of whole number coefficients, getting into some rational coefficients, mostly whole number coefficients of phi scaled S modules and E modules and stuff. You go up and down, right, with like a beer mug. Right here, you might want to have a break, and everybody gets beer. And your mugs are sized phi-wise, right? So linearly, phi up, the whole glass can grow, right? And you know the third power would be the volume, and second power change in the surface area, right? Read scale, Santa Fe Institute, all that, okay? If you want, but do drink some beer or some other liquid at this point. Maybe take a break. I got some Pinot Noir here. I'm supposed to call the doctor back and go see him. I'm doing okay though, I think. All right, so this again is not in Synergetics, the published 2 volumes. This is a Gerald Zhejiang understanding he's a mathematician by training background, and at that point he was with a bunch of us on a listserv and doing a lot of thinking about synergetics, as was I. This was in our youthful days, as as bright as we're going to be, probably. And he came up with this, which looks a lot like volume formulas for tetrahedrons you're going to find in textbooks, including going back, right, into the Italian Renaissance kind of time. But they are different. They're usually going to have a big constant. Like, you're going to do all this machinations. These are the edge links here. We're just feeding in 6 edge links and getting out the volume. That's what this is. And there's a lot of precedent for this, including from Euler. But this one spits out exactly the tetravolumes, right? What is the volume of a tetrahedron in terms of tetravolume? So you see tetravolume, talking about tetravolume. Sphere packing. Once you're into tetrahedrons, that's 4 equiradius spheres packed together. You get the CCP. Dr. Arthur Loeb really liked introducing the CCP without the unit cube in the usual way, but having a growing pattern. This is not the textbook way to introduce the CCP. But people don't study synergetics, I should mention, in the university, because it would belong in the philosophy department. But it's got a little too much math for some philosophers, but it's not. It doesn't have enough Quine. He doesn't quote Wittgenstein anywhere, so it doesn't fit. Synergetics is one of those books that barges into intellectual history expecting us to accommodate it, and it's like, why would we do that? We got careers here. Why would we do that? So that's Alexander Graham Bell. Now there's a lot of made up tensions, like between Bucky and Bell. It's like, oh, Bucky just ripped off Bell, and look at this, Bell was into the same thing. Now, that's, Fuller was made aware of the fact that they were thinking alike, great minds think alike, and even wrote this prologue about it. And then there's the Fuller-Kenneth Snelson rivalry. People don't realize that I was Kenneth Snelson's first webmaster, as well as the Bucky Fuller Institutes, and that we were good friends, Kenneth and I. And, it's basically he buried the hatchet. In fact, that I turned out to be okay in his views. So, hey, that, I would say, tension has been reconciled to a large degree. And if you don't know that, and you're still going around with all these trash talk about Bucky, you probably haven't done much to update yourself. So as students of mine right now and teachers of this material, be aware that your audience will not have done its homework, by and large. Most likely. But then maybe it has, like, I don't know your audience directly. If they already know about C60 here, then they've done more than their average amount of homework, probably. This appeared in Lattice Gallery also last winter here in Portland before the pandemic. Had a lot of people come through. I mean, the gallery was a little bit off the main line in terms of where Portland puts galleries, but it was a legit gallery, and we did get some decent traffic, I would say. I was kind of manning the place quite a bit, and I thought it was an excellent introduction to synergetics, but also to structural engineering in general, where the two come together, right? Because this here, what we're looking at is a truss, the same IVM basically we're talking about with Alexander Graham Bell, but not the same, completely different in terms of the strategy used to hold the. It takes a lot of stress. This thing I've watched it being put under tremendous stress under machines that measure the stress. In other words, a lot of science has gone on since Synergetics was published by Macmillan in the late 70s, early 80s, so like 79, 81. It's 2 volumes, right? So it's been like 40 years, and you would think that more people would get into this 4D stuff. The art world has understood to a degree what Fuller was up to with the 4D, but they haven't gotten a lot of help, right? Because a lot of people are too busy. And the wrong audience, right? It's like mathematicians and physicists try to read synergetics. They don't know anything about Ezra Pound, right? So yeah, all tetrahedrons defined by 4 IVM nodes, sphere-packed centers, packed sphere centers. All tetrahedrons formed at random from any 4 of those vertices are always IVM balls. This defines a tetrahedron of a whole number volume. Another game you can play with IVM balls is pick a middle one and now have a sweep arm of any length that goes straight out to some other ball. So let's fix it to a ball-to-ball length, and now sweep that thing around that segment and create the biggest convex polyhedron you can, the most convexity within a radius using IVM. All your points have to be in the IVM. That's your basic game. That's called the Waterman polyhedron. And those got sent to me, little models, and I got in touch with Waterman, and we only corresponded. We never met. I don't think we ever even talked on the phone. He was in Canada. But I thought he had a really cool idea, Waterman polyhedrons, and I helped him model them at first. Then he found people who were better at it than me. I think he worried I was going to steal his idea and not give him credit. But hey, I'm just doing IVM stuff, and his things are very, very, very relevant. So Waterman polyhedra, check them out. They're not in the slideshow here. But quadrate coordinates are. This is where that same listserv with Gerald de Jong and a bunch of people went on to, as one of the threads, right? You know how listservs are, public discussion groups, mail lists. There's often several threads going, different people interested in different things. So Quadrates grew up in that kind of environment at first. And I was very much a contributor because of the computer programming skills. What I do in this slideshow and what I suggest you do, and this is the whole point with the dimension investigation into that word, a kind of a Wittgensteinian investigation into the meaning of dimension. You're doing that by setting up the quadrate coordinates and linking to Fuller's meaning, how he uses the word dimension, which is different, right? Especially 4D. I'll go back to that early slide now that we've seen the basic math, where he takes apart 1, 2, 3-dimensional. The idea that you could split those apart and have them sort of stand around independently of each other in this weird way. We talk about how independent these 3 dimensions are of one another. But conceptually, are they? I mean, can you imagine length but no breadth at all? And if you're going back to like Flatland again, I mean, again, that's not math. So phenomenologically, as a Kantian, isn't space the beginning, right? It's not one dimension. It's whatever space is. And Fuller says ab initio, it's like a tetrahedron space. That's your most primitive container. And the fourness of a tetrahedron is very pronounced. The faces, the corners, it screams four. So let's take all our associations with 3D, how we understand 3D, in this poetic namespace in another channel on your cable TV. We're going to have it be 4D, right? We're just going to talk differently, think different, right? We're allowed to, actually. This is okay. We don't need permission from the sort of orthodox enforcers of 3D talk. In fact, I'm a calculus teacher. I know the 3D talk as well as more. I'm on the bell curve at least one standard deviation above what most people know with the XYZ coordinate system, and with machine learning. These days, we just use dimension for everything. Everything about you on the Titanic, from how many kids are there with you to what room you stayed in, is an independent dimension in a high dimensional space. And we do linear algebra in there. And it's useful. And we have basically polytopes equals AI, right? Okay, I understand extended Euclideanism. It's not alien to me. But hey, here's a different language game. Different. Woo. But no, we don't have time for this kind of stuff. Now, if Bucky had, he's great futurist. A lot of Cold War policies were affected by him because he had this kind of upbeat idea of the Cold War. Let's compete on living standards, not who can kill who the fastest in the shortest, most efficient amount of time. Let's see who can make their people happier. Let's compete cold. Cold means not a hot war. Let's make it so cold that we're just trying to make our people happier in a competition. But of course, you can't make people happy with, it's more complicated. You don't make people happy, right? People don't like to be, you don't make people happy. So he had kind of a hands-off approach to human nature. He wasn't going to mess with that. You can talk about his sayings in those regards, like change the environment, don't change people, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, once we get the dimension like that, then we're ready to divide. We're going into Coxeter's quote here and saying, here's Coxeter not thinking about Bucky at all, saying the kind of stuff I do, the regular polytope, extended Euclidean machine learning, also came out of University of Toronto later, Hinton and all. That's not what that's what I'm doing. Coxeter, that's not what Einstein's doing, right? Einstein with relativity and the way time goes there and how it works with Minkowski and all that, different geometry. Don't confuse them. We both use 4D, like 5D, 6D. Coxeter, you can have as many, have as many dimensions as you want, and it doesn't make any difference in terms of the math, right? I mean, there's different properties at different dimensions, different polytopes, but in relativity, in physics, you're not just going to throw in dimensions quite like that, in that way, right? You've got 3D plus time, and you don't just throw in more and more dimensions so easily, right? So they're just not the same. Complex numbers, different role. It's just, okay, so I made my point. So once you've got two ways of saying 4D and meaning different things, doesn't that mean you could have 3 ways, 4 ways, 5 ways? Like people say 4D chess, don't they? Or do they say 3D chess? What if they said 4D chess? Who knows what that means exactly? But if somebody markets it a certain way, it could solidify as to what 4D chess means someday, right? I think chess is math, right? Some people think board games and stuff like that aren't part of math. Well, I say they are. Tic-tac-toe, that's math. Chess is math. Now, a mathematician is going to say, no, that's not math, but then other mathematicians will disagree. So I'm just telling you, chess is part of math. Chess is math. 4D chess is math. Okay, checkmate. Just made people angry. So necessarily make people angry. So yeah, like this, right? So in 2D, we can still use the old lingo. Here's, but these pixels have depth, okay? And you're separate from them looking. So we're in 4D or space no matter what, but you can go use the old Cartesian talk as much as you want. I sure do. So here's 2D and how we could multiply. We could, and we could do three numbers could multiply to give volume, as we do now. If you've seen the Glen Canyon Dam segments in my last video, you know that we've got this whole Martian mass storyboard worked out for teaching this stuff. And a lot of like elite sort of Quaker school curriculum is what I think of it. A lot of schools of that nature using that kind of curriculum. This stuff's been going out, for years already, right? In 2020, a lot of people already know all this. They know it well. I'd say if you're in like cultural attaché, like if you're going overseas and representing American culture to the world, they come to you, the embassy, you're supposed to, oh, Americans, what do they know? They better know synergetics, right? Don't even think about foreign service without any knowledge of your culture, right? It's like, oh, I'm from America, but I've never heard of Gershwin. What's Gershwin? Never heard of Sam Hill. What? And you have this job? What a hick, You have no cultural literacy whatsoever, right? So I've talked about how it's kind of a logic, dimension theory, and all that. And I'm assuming if you're thinking of teaching this stuff, you kind of know it. So that's why I kind of went kind of fast through some of it. It's not about teaching you synergetics. It's about recommending how you want to use these slides. Like go out and do these slides. Start today if you want. Escher's flatworms. Now, I would hype, if I were you, the tension between Canada and the U.S. and the DEW line and the DEW line domes, the Cold War domes, and, emphasize that Escher's Canadian and emphasize the whole thing, the tension between the imperialist Fuller colonizing Canada and, Escher's kid and Coxeter's kid want to get into making these domes because they understand the geometry and they're kind of cool, but they would have to go through Fuller, who holds the patent. And this is the early open source rebelliousness. It's like, how can you patent the geometry of nature? How can you patent things like this, right? And it gets people angry at the whole patent system. And a lot of people are angry at Bucky. You don't get that when you first read kind of the cloying, sentimental stuff, all the little quotes and all the, the usual stuff like they do with people, They try to make them into saints or whatever, But once you dig down beneath that hallmark stuff and get into the nitty gritty, you find out that you're dealing with a pretty interesting and serious part of your culture, and that it's all around you. What you might not have recognized now jumps into the foreground. The dots connect. And if you've already had that experience, then you can bring that to the slideshow or your version of the slideshow. When you show this version of my slideshow, you could admit it's kind of weird, quirky. It's got my sense of humor, which is to end with some Don Quixote references. And I'm not a student of Don Quixote or, it's like, it's the meme that I know really well, right? So I'm not getting deep into this here. I'm not, but you might, right? You're a Don Quixote teacher. So here's where we end up. We have a picture here at the end, Applewhite. Now I've already mentioned Angelton and and Ezra Pound and and all this Cold War stuff. And here in the channel, I find like a link where Bucky Fuller is recommending a British journalist as a first contact to help reconnect with intelligence in Vietnam over where the pilots are going down and stuff, because the Japanese have moved in now. It's the beginning of Japanese colonization of Vietnam, which was happening in the Philippines and so on too, and then the war and the pushback and all that's going on in that regard. The French are there, but they're not communicating anymore about downed pilots. So Fuller somehow recommends that so and so go over there and make contact with the Vietnamese resistance to the Japanese, and that's the beginning of the relationship with Ho Chi Minh. So I talk about Ho Chi Minh and history in Asia, so all of that, and Fuller does not shirk from that, is what I want to say. And Applewhite here is career Central Intelligence Agency, is what I want to say, and he's very out about that. It's not a secret at all, right? Everyone knows that about Ed. So that's where to put Fuller in history terms. He's a poet, but he knows he's been in the Navy, and he's one of those Washington insiders. He's a Cold Warrior. I don't know if I'd go so far as to say a spy. I don't think so. But Ed was, right? So he's friendly with spies. He knows the DC, right? He's deep state. He's early deep state. Or late deep state, whatever you want to call it. He's the last of the deep state. And then after that, it was just cronies, okay? Because Grudge of Giants, right? I didn't get into that, but that's a whole other narrative that I recommend highly, especially if you want to understand my work, which would be a whole different slideshow, right? All right, so that's the slideshow, and the Python part's important. There's a lot out there already for you in source code that the kids have been using already. Like, they got a whole generation of people already trained in this stuff, so. But not a lot, so there's a big niche here for you if you're looking for something to do, especially during this pandemic. You want to catch up on your culture? The fact that this is not really studied much in universities tells you a lot, right? Now study my global university meme in the meantime, if you want to figure that out. It's a university regardless, right? This stuff's there. It's not a good excuse that, oh, they don't teach it at Harvard. Well, who cares, right? Who cares? I don't. All right. Talk to you again soon.